who are watching this as a recording or who are listening via our podcast, we are now speaking on Wednesday afternoon, 2:00 Eastern time, shortly after President Joe Biden has just visited Israel earlier today. I want to thank all of our live listeners joining our webinar this afternoon and encourage you all to ask questions throughout our conversation by typing your question in the Q&A function within your Zoom screen. And once again, thank you all for joining us. Amos, especially thank you. I want to acknowledge that there could be sirens amidst continued rocket attacks on Israel. And Amos, you may need to run figuratively, literally, to a bomb shelter should the sirens sound. So with acknowledging that, Amos, I'd love to get your thoughts really on the last 24 hours. That have been an incredibly consequential 24 hours, it seems, in the evolution of this crisis. So Amos, could you give us just a recap of what we've seen in just the last day or so?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, David, from Hod Sharon, slightly north of Tel Aviv. Thank you for inviting me. I have to apologize a bit about my somewhat rugged looks, but we're all going for a Zelensky style by now. I'm hoping to lose some weight during this period. Other than that, it's been exhausting, it's been horrific, it's been frightening, and it has tested most of our line of thinking about everything around us. A lot of things. I think that the first day or the second day, somebody compared this to the Holocaust. And I even wrote something else. I think the Holocaust is a singular event in the history of humankind. And secondly, I think there's still the IDF, which is supposed to be a strong army to protect us. And yet those memories are, there's something very deep about that, about how people are worried and afraid, something that wasn't common before. So getting back to the actual events in the last 24 hours, President Biden's visit was very, very important. I think it was inspiring. And the first speech, while Israel was still in the midst of mourning, I think that was Monday or Tuesday last week. That was a big deal as well. Now it's about the actual understandings. The decision to send the Air Force carrier immediately last week, I think it showed us that the Americans were preparing for something like that. You know more about the way government conducts itself in the US than I do, but I really don't remember anything like a response within 36 hours by the US to anything. This means that the Americans were worried, that they were concerned about the way our current government is handling issues, and that they had a plan prepared for such an occasion. And the fact that the president actually showed up here also says a lot about the man. I think Israelis were really, really touched by everything he said last week and today as well, but also about the way the administration sees things. And this is a bear hug, if you like. We need the American support right now. If Biden said don't to Iran and Hezbollah last week, he said 3 times don't today. We hope that this would mean something in the region. But then we need more than moral support. Under these conditions, having been surprised and needing to get ourselves out of this mess, there has to be a strong signal about this relationship between America and Israel, and about what America can do if Israel, in fact, gets into a more trouble or something even more serious than before. So that's the most important issue right now. There was an incident that was threatening to change the course of the war yesterday. It hasn't done that, but it showed us what we're heading into if, in fact, the IDF increases its attacks in Gaza, something that I think would happen. That was the incident near the hospital in Gaza. You probably recall this was yesterday evening, Israeli time, reports of hundreds of dead people in Gaza, presumably by an Israeli airstrike. I think within 30, 40 minutes, it was quite clear that this was not the case, but it took the IDF close to 3 hours to realize what actually happened. And after analyzing all kinds of photos and videos, some of them by the Israeli media, not only by the IDF, the Israeli media put cameras all over the place in towns and villages around the Gaza Strip, so you can see the rockets being launched. And in this case, it was quite clear that Islamic Jihad launched 3 or 4 rockets. One of them, there was some kind of technical problem, and it exploded in the parking lot of a hospital. And this, by the aerial photos, quite clearly this morning, it was quite evident that this isn't the kind of damage done by something that the Israeli Air Force uses. There could be a massive hole around such a place being hit, but neither the effect or the number of people presumably being killed seemed logical. So within about 3 hours, we realized that this wasn't the true story. Now it's quite clear that Hamas made a mess of this intentionally. Not only were they covering for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's mistakes, but they were using it against Israel. And anybody who had a scratch there was presented as if he died. And it's very difficult to tell in Gaza, especially under the current chaos. And you have to remember that the health ministry in Gaza is in fact the Hamas ministry. So they're getting their orders from Hamas. I don't know how many people actually were killed there. It's a tragedy anyway. It could be 20 or 30. There weren't 500 dead bodies there under any circumstances. And of course, Israel couldn't be blamed for anything for this, because Israel keeps striking in Gaza in order to defend itself, but it's not targeting civilians intentionally, and it's not targeting hospitals. It can happen in the future. The fact that things are so messy there and everything is so densely populated, even when half the population of the northern part of the Gaza Strip is left to the south, means that there will be mistakes, that there will be incidents in which we kill the wrong people. And right now, I think again, you can't trust statistics from Gaza, but there were some reports that 40% of people who actually died in Gaza were armed men or terrorists from Hamas and other organizations. This wouldn't remain the percentage if we go further into this. If you think of the American army, they usually talk of 1 to 10, one armed man to every 9 or 10 civilians being killed. It's very, very hard to make the distinction under these circumstances. For the time being, the IDF is trying very hard, but it will get harder. And I think we have to remember, this is all-out war. This is different than the previous operations. And I think they're thinking of collateral damage and so on, but the lawyers, I would assume, are more permissive than before, given what's at stake. And I have to admit, given the fact that there is a sense that things need to be different. Many of you probably saw the video. I think it was a British expert who explained why you can't murder and rape proportionally now in Gaza, in response to what was done to us. We're fighting terrorism, and this is really, really like ISIS. I usually refrain from such comparisons, but this, when you look at the horrific photos there and you hear what people are telling, there's a very good story by my colleague Nir Fasson, who covered the events in Nir Oz, which is a small kibbutz that was probably hit worse than any other kibbutz in the area. I think they lost about a third of their population, and another third are still missing. And this is, these are Nazi methods. They were thinking of the best way to kill civilians, to slaughter civilians. And this has affected the Israeli psyche. And I think we will see long-term implications of this in the future. So right now, the situation in Gaza, we're still doing standoff attacks. At one point or another, the ground forces would enter. It will be bloody and messy, and there will be many casualties. And Hamas, of course, is hiding in tunnels under Gaza. There's a whole system there, hundreds of kilometers, presumably, of inroads under ground, and it will be very, very difficult. We'll probably talk about that later, but there's a difference between what Israel talks about and the time frame and the system being discussed. Because if you listen to all of the Israeli statements by Halevi, the chief of staff, or Netanyahu, or Gallant, the defense minister, and so on, the bar is set very, very high. We will destroy Hamas. We will kill every terrorist, and so on. This is talk which is similar to Raqqa or Mosul, fighting in East Syria or northern Iraq against ISIS by the Americans 6 or 7 years ago. But then it was actually mostly Iraqi soldiers with the boots on the ground, and the city was destroyed. This is different. You have civilian population there. Not everybody is leaving. The West, which now shows understanding and some even feels some sense of sympathy with our cause, it would look different in a few weeks or months. So I'm not sure about the time frame, in spite of everything that all the good things that the president said today. Last but not least, Lebanon. We see Nasrallah for the last week playing with the lights, if you'd like, with the dimmer, stronger sometimes, weaker at sometimes. It's quite clear that he has some kind of an appetite for destruction right now, that he was, just like everybody else in the region, swept away by what Hamas could achieve, and that he may be entertaining the thought that this is the golden opportunity, that this is the window he's been dreaming for so many years, and he could contribute to Israel's defeat, maybe not destruction, but defeat. This is why Biden has said don't, and Biden threatened Iran specifically, and I think France and Germany and England are not, and the UK are not far behind, although I'm not sure if they would join the fight actively. Right now, the understanding among many in the intelligence community is that the decision hasn't been taken yet, and that perhaps Nasrallah would still like to show that he's fighting for the Palestinians without paying the full price. Because even if Israel is hit very badly, and we will see some kind of what was known as the War of the Cities between Iraq and Iran 40 years ago, where both sides were sending rockets and bombing each other. Even under these circumstances, there's a lot of damage that the IDF and especially the Israeli Air Force could do to Lebanon. And both Nasrallah and the Iranians may be risking their huge project built in Lebanon, this arsenal of weapons that was built there in order to restrain Israel in a way, in order to have the Israelis think twice before we try to strike their nuclear sites in Iran. So this is a high price for them, even if there is a golden opportunity. Having said all that, I think we should be careful not to be, again, carried away by wishful thinking. And we should remember that the intelligence community, all of it, has failed, had its worst failure ever, more than the Yom Kippur War, just 2 weeks ago. So these guys, it's hard for them to trust their instincts, and it's hard to trust them for the government and so on right now. So it's very, very volatile. It's sad. It's frightening to many. It is, in fact, an ordeal. And I don't think there's a single Israeli who doesn't know somebody who was killed or kidnapped or injured in these incidents, including Arabs and Bedouins and Druze and whatever. And Ukrainian immigrants people who fled Ukraine to get some peace and quiet in Tel Aviv and went to a party. Went to dance near the Gaza border and were slaughtered and didn't have a clue that this was going to happen. So the country is still in shock, and this is quite a big thing.
So Amos, you've just covered a lot, and I want to unpack some of the implications of the Biden visit, the humanitarian crisis, the regional implications and the like. But I want to start actually with the comment that you just made about really not just a traumatized Israeli public, but also a traumatized, in some ways, Israeli security establishment. With the creation now of a national unity government, how do you see the current government and the military juggling what seems to be, frankly, an unprecedented set of challenges, perhaps in modern history, between the fighting in Gaza with the airstrikes, the preparation for a ground invasion, the threat from the north, the West Bank potentially sparking, and of course, the basic needs of the citizens amidst evacuating citizens and the like. This set of challenges, I'm not even mentioning the hostages, we could go on and on.
Don't get me started. Yeah.
The set of the immediate challenges, that astronomical to-do list that the Israeli government and the security establishment now face, I'm curious, how do you see the government responding? Are you seeing an effective response now that this crisis was sparked by the attack, but now we have the unity government in place? Are you seeing positive signs that give you confidence? What is the state of the leadership in responding to these many challenges?
Look, I have an obligation for the truth. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but not yet and not enough is the right answer, I think. First of all, we have an army and Shin Bet as well, who are in shock. These people were trained, spent most of their time for 30 years. If we talk about the generals, people around my age, 50 plus, spent more than 30 years in Israel's defense, are usually used to either winning battles or at least not losing them. They lost friends, they lost relatives, they paid personal prices many times, but Israel's hand was almost always the stronger hand against our enemies. Even if you look back at the Lebanon War in 2006, and I wrote a book with Avi Yisachar about that. It was called 34 Days, and it was, our conclusions there were quite devastating, but this was about 10% of what we're facing now. After, if you think of the casualties, it was more than, the casualties in one day in Gaza were 10 times the number of what we experienced in the whole 34 days of fighting in Lebanon. So this is quite a deep hole we've dug ourselves into. And then you have to think of the combination of events. And so going back to the military, these are people who are consumed with guilt. They did not do their job. They are good people. They're honest people, most of them. And they will carry this burden for the rest of their lives. We think of the Yom Kippur generals, especially the intelligence people. This was still discussed a week before the current war started, because it was 50 years for Yom Kippur. And in fact, my headline for Haaretz that day of the eve of Yom Kippur was, in retrospect, almost like a prophecy. I didn't know, of course, because it was a discussion of the concept of surprise, and the editor who chose the headline, which was the front page story in the news in Haaretz on the eve of Yom Kippur, was the next surprise would come. The question is Israel ready for it? Quite prophetic. I had no idea, of course. In retrospect, it seems all reasonable. But think of these people sharing this shock and, of course, looking for some kind of redemption. This is a dangerous situation. So it's everybody's consumed with these huge emotions. It's a big deal as well. And most of them have already admitted their failure. They've apologized to the Israeli people. You can guess which politician was slightly involved in this, did not do anything like that. Everybody else did. And they all said that, and they got back to work. But they know that their future is behind them already. Their political future, if they had any kind of plans, their future in the army, if they wanted to be chief of staff, they're going home when this thing finally ends. But now there's this sense that they want to improve, they want to do things, and it may be good to be theoretically, but it's a very volatile situation again. So that's one thing. Secondly, we have Netanyahu. I wrote about him. Forgive me for quoting myself, but nobody else is going to do that. I wrote about him on Friday. He's a Shakespearean character by now, and there's quite a clear danger that this would end in tragedy, but it would always also be tragic for the country. He was, I'm not hiding my personal opinions about this, because I kept writing about this for the last 3 years. But he swept this country into this huge political crisis, which was all about his political situation, his legal situation, and his attempt to change Israel's rule of law and damage Israel's democracy. And it's quite clear, although he's shifting the blame to other places, and it's true that the generals are to blame as well, that our enemies identified this period of crisis where Israelis were shouting and sometimes fighting each other on the streets, sometimes violently, for 9 months as the right time to hit. I'm not sure that there's a big Iranian conspiracy. It's quite clear that Hamas knew what it was doing, that Hamas chose the right time to attack, and that everybody in this radical axis assumed that Israel would be too busy with its own problems to notice that something like this was going to happen. That's a dangerous gamble, and I think that Sinwar and Def, the leaders of Hamas, probably cost the Palestinian people a much greater disaster. I'm not comparing in moral terms, but think of people becoming refugees right now. I'm not sure that they're going back to Gaza, not because Israel would expel them, but because maybe Gaza city would not be livable after what is going on. Think of Raqqa and Mosul. It took years later, and ISIS was swept away completely. So again, this is very, very difficult. There's a lot of discussion among Haaretz writers and readers on the left, what should be done about Netanyahu. My guess is that he would, although he would fight this tooth and nail, in the end, he would be swept out by a huge wave of aggression and anger by the Israeli people. This would be much bigger than anything like Golda and Yom Kippur. Think of the sheer numbers. Again, Biden compared that today to 15 times 9/11. This is, again, proportionally, this is what happened to Israel. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, almost.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the situation right now. I wouldn't try now to push him out like some people are saying. I think that this is the government we have. We still have the people. We still have the Am Israel, if you like. We've seen huge waves of volunteering again because the government is not doing its job. Because other than the defense ministry, no other ministry is headed by anybody who's worth anything about regarding their jobs. Either politicians who could never rise to the job and only got their jobs because they kept groveling and flattering the Netanyahu family, or the fact that so many director generals and senior officials were pushed out because they needed the place. So all kinds of Likud activists and so on who knew nothing about the jobs. So the government is not performing well. I still see islands of greater quality, whether it's in the IDF headquarters, Shin Bet slightly improving now after the huge fiasco, Mossad, which has not been hurt by the scandal yet, the Air Force. There are islands of massive quality. If you think of all of you have been to Israel many times. We have many problems, but there are many good aspects about the Israeli population and the public and so on, in spite of everything that we went through in the last Netanyahu years. And I think that, like Ukraine, we could rise. I'd like to think that we could rise from this mess, but this would get harder before, hopefully, it gets better. The fact that the president was here today, the fact that he spoke in such plain words, is extremely crucial. And again, I don't want to intervene with American politics. I don't know enough about the way your system works under these circumstances. But I think that any Jewish organization, whether it's your organization, and forgive me for preaching, I never do that with American Jews, but this is something else. But any organization worth its salt, be it Israel Policy Forum, or J Street, or God forbid, or AIPAC, all of these organizations right now need to make it extremely clear to senators and officials on both sides of the divide that you have back home that this is the time to support Israel, and that under extreme circumstances, maybe even a direct military involvement. I know it's not a popular idea. I know you've been hit by this in the past, Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon 83 and so on. But again, after seeing those photos and thinking of what could happen and seeing the sites and thinking of what could happen to Israeli society even under this, what would the economy look like in a year? What would people do regarding motivation to serve in the army? Would some people think that under these circumstances the right thing to do is leave? This is different than before. This is somewhat similar to 48. And, it took some time till the U.S. gave us help so many years ago, but now is the time, it's not just about the talk, it's about the real action. I trust President Biden completely, but I think that there should be real constant pressure, This should be the number one issue with the American media and with with Congress and so on, because we will need that support, whether it's deployment, whether it's ammunition, which is at one point gets scarce, especially if it's a two-front war or three-front war, and whether it's even, I never thought I'd say something like this, whether it's even under extreme scenarios, actual American military involvement. Because if Hezbollah has 160,000 rockets and missiles, and it's even entertaining the thought of having a shooting war with Israel and launching missiles to Tel Aviv and Haifa, anyone can understand that you don't have that number of intercepting rockets. This would mean devastation to all those cities that you've visited and liked before. And a lot of people may be getting killed. It's a very serious matter. More people will get killed probably in Lebanon and in Gaza from the other side. But we're getting to a dangerous situation. And you'll probably hear a lot of The Guardian would write that restraint is needed and so on. And I'm not even too sure about what the right line of action is, because I've messed up in my assessment before. I cannot give advice. I just don't give advice. I didn't do a lot of this before even. I was usually cautious, but I've messed up in a lot of what I've thought about this situation. But evidently it's going into an aggressive Israeli stance in Gaza, more perhaps using soldiers on the ground and so on. It's quite clear to everybody. And under these circumstances, I think we'll probably need a lot of help from America.
So Amos, I can certainly say on behalf of Israel Policy Forum that I think we're all heartened by President Biden's visit and demonstration that support for Israel's security is not merely rhetoric, but is actually, this is the moment to put it in action, and recognizing that the way in which Israel's security was so clearly violated on October 7th is not something that can ever be allowed to happen again. We have a lot of questions from the audience, but I do want to come back to Biden's visit for just a moment before I go to some of those questions, or perhaps weave some of those questions into my own. Because in addition to the bear hug, so to speak, with the United States, with the state of Israel, there's a sense that Biden's visit perhaps also gave time or gave encouragement for addressing humanitarian needs in Gaza. I wonder if you could comment on that, with the United States now announcing $100 million to Gaza. And there was some reports that Rafah would be opened for humanitarian needs, and then a subsequent speech by Netanyahu that suggested, I think, perhaps you can clarify whether the humanitarian needs would be addressed before hostages were released. And so I wonder if you could address the humanitarian issue in the wake of Biden's visit, the hostage issue as well. Is this part of buying time to think about diplomatic opportunities on the hostages? And I think a consistent theme that I'm seeing in the questions is that now, a week and a half out, we have not yet seen a ground invasion. Is it inevitable? Are ground troops indeed headed towards Gaza?
Okay, so there are quite a few questions here, and you'll have to remind me if I forget to answer some.
All three: humanitarian, hostages, and ground war.
Okay. One result of not having much sleep is gradually losing your English vocabulary at this time of day, but I'll try. Anyway, humanitarian, look, a few days after this horrific attack happened, what you saw from Israeli ministers, and remember, not all of them the brightest of the bunch, the best and the brightest, being so angry, justifiably so, about what happened, what we saw is a very aggressive, saw and heard very, very aggressive speeches. We don't care about anything. We'll kill anybody that stands in our way. We'll kill all Hamas, but if there are Palestinian civilians, let them live in tents somewhere. It doesn't. There was a lot of talk of in Israeli media of wiping out neighborhoods in Gaza and so on. So because everybody was very, very emotional about that, and I have to understand where this is coming from. But this was dangerously going into areas where Israel could get itself in big problems regarding international law. And of course, the Biden administration, at least publicly, makes the distinction. if you go back to some of Americans' deeds during America's wars in the region, not always did they obtain all of these rules of engagement and so on. But again, some of the things that are permitted in the eyes of the West to America are, unfortunately, there's a double standard when it comes to Israel. But this is different, and Israel is going to be more aggressive. But I think the administration is worried about that, and I think what the president did was to say to Israel, look, you have all our support. We're here to defend you from Lebanon and Iran if necessary. We're here, we'll supply you with all your needs. There's no pressure of time. But on the other hand, you will need to maintain a humanitarian corridor. You would need to allow supplies to come in and so on. And what you saw in the last 2 days, Netanyahu, of course, understands this. He has much more experience and intelligence than anybody else involved in this from the Israeli side. And of course, what you see is this gap between the public rhetoric and what is actually done behind the scenes. And Israel, in response to what the Americans have announced, has agreed to allow these convoys to the Rafah crossing to supply water and food and so on. But it maintained that if it found out that some of this was meant for Hamas, it would find a way to block them. So these are the more or less the rules of engagement around that. We'll have to see how this actually operates and what actually happens with the northern part of Gaza where Israel is about to act. Regarding the hostages, we don't know a lot. There's all kinds of discussions. I don't know, they're quite vague, and I'm not sure if they're theoretical or not. We've seen some hints of Qataris being involved, maybe the Egyptians. Look, all of these countries, I wouldn't say that they have blood on their hands, but they were involved in this. They were involved in misleading Israel, in saying that if you only allow some more Palestinian workers to work in the villages on the Israeli side of Gaza, then things will get normal. If you only allow some more money to come in, then Hamas may become more moderate. In the end, those workers in the villages around Gaza, in the kibbutzim, they collected information. Amir Tibon, my friend, who became unfortunately too famous recently because of his personal ordeal that ended so well, magical story. I really think that all of you should, if you didn't do it already, read his story in the Haaretz, his interview in the Atlantic, and he had an interview in 60 Minutes yesterday and had an audience with Biden today. So Amir, their cleaning lady, who's Ukrainian, told his wife 2 weeks ago that somebody was taking photographs of his house. It's quite clear that this was one of the Palestinian workers. He thought nothing of it and didn't realize that this was collecting information. In Netiv HaSara, which is the Moshav, which is very close, the village very close to the Gaza Strip, they found maps with information saying in each house how many children were there and if there was a dog there. They came to slaughter and kidnap and rape and so on, but they came with the operation. It was an operation that was meant to kill and maim and rape, was meant against civilians, but it was prepared very, very professionally. So, it's hard to talk about humanitarian issues right now with Israelis. Going back to the hostages, I don't know if there's a window of opportunity there. Something will be discussed once there is a ground invasion. There will be even more bombings and so on. You will hear Hamas stories about hostages being killed by Israel, supposedly by Israeli airstrikes. I would assume some of these would be true. Some of these would be hostages, unfortunately, being murdered by Hamas. Hamas stops at nothing. It's like ISIS, exactly. A lot of psychological warfare over this. We hear, again, Israeli leaders talking all the time about the need to destroy Hamas and release the hostages. It's very hard to do both at the same time. If there's a chance of releasing at least the civilians among the hostages before that, if it happened, it's a very good, it's the best thing that could happen under the current circumstances. I'm not sure if it's something operational already. Theoretically, you could do a swap deal where there are about 100 or 150 Palestinian prisoners, not murderers of Israelis, who are either underage minors or women. And maybe you could do swap deal for that, but they will still maintain bodies and perhaps live soldiers that they have, and there is quite a significant number. I won't get into the details. And there will be others who will be kept by Hamas. So I say this with sorrow, but I'm not very optimistic about a happy Hollywood ending to this specific story. And I know all of you have been following this, and everybody's crying about this and very emotional, and for the best of reasons. But unfortunately, there won't be many stories like the Tibon family. There were many miracles, really miracles of huge courage by the villages, residents themselves, and by families, and by brave civilians who came to help, and by policemen and soldiers and so on. But there were many others who were slaughtered, and I can't promise anybody that there will be a happy ending to the hostage issue.
Almost on the ground invasion, we have a lot of questions, including one from our friend Aaron Miller. Look, you've heard all of the analysis here that Hamas is waiting for the IDF. They've booby-trapped. They have the tunnels, and of course, the messages that we've been hearing by various analysts, of course, as well, is that Israel should learn the lessons of the United States after 9/11 to not act or head into a war without a clear exit strategy. So I wonder if you could talk about, is the ground invasion now inevitable? And if indeed it is a ground invasion, is there any sense of what happens next?
It's close to inevitable. I don't know how massive it would be. I'm not sure that this vision painted to the Israeli public of we'll search every house and destroy every weapons arsenal and so on. I'm not sure if we have the appetite for this in the long run, and I'm quite fearful for the possibility of casualties, of massive casualties. We will kill more Hamas men than Israeli soldiers will get killed, but it's a very, very complicated arena, and I'm not sure. And the other side has had a lot of time to prepare, and apparently they were not thinking of ways to improving life in Gaza. This was a whole charade that they were actually preparing for this. These are masterminds of terror, and they're looking for a rematch, if you'd like, and it's on their home turf. So I think that Israel would need to be smart about this and not rush into this with all its power. It would have to try to find ways. It's going to be very, very difficult. We saw a successful assassination yesterday of one of the top 5 terrorists in Gaza, Ayman Nofel. If we can get to kill, if Israel succeeds in killing Deif and Sinwar, Mohammed Deif and Yahya Sinwar, who are the leaders of both the military wing and the political wing in Gaza, and who are behind this horrific attack, I think that the Israeli public would be happy about this. There would be a sense that some justice was done. But then again, these guys are quite experienced. They have avoided Israel for so many years. Deaf, there were endless attempts to assassinate him. He was blinded in one eye, crippled, and so on. But he's still there 30 years later. While Sinwar, of course, was released in the Shalit deal in 2011, a deal I supported. I felt it was the right thing to do to save the life of the Israeli soldier and send a message to combat fighters that Israel cares more about life than the other side. And then again, Sinwar, who speaks perfect Hebrew, spent years in Israeli jails, reading Israeli media and so on, is now the man behind this terrible bloodshed. So, a lot of Israelis hope that that some justice would be served. But it's hard to tell what the outcome is. And I think one of the problems, again, is that with all this blood rushing to the head, the targets may have been painted. We're going to destroy Hamas regime, and so on. But the messaging is not clear yet. The wording is not really clear. And even when President Biden spoke, there was a difference between the fact that he supported the destruction of Hamas and the fact that he said, but don't occupy Gaza, don't reoccupy Gaza. How do you do both? Very hard to tell.
Right. And it appears now, of course, the orders to evacuate the northern Gaza Strip for the southern, presumably there will be a ground operation in the northern Gaza Strip, but then of course there are all sorts of targets, I'm sure, in the southern Gaza Strip as well, which how do you eliminate Hamas's ability to govern amidst that civilian population in the next round? I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what we might anticipate in that ground invasion, and whether it seems to me, you're suggesting that eliminating Hamas entirely may be an unrealistic goal. Is that your sense?
Yes. First of all, Hamas is an idea in the end, quite different than ISIS. So eliminating completely would be very, very difficult. If we can get them down, we can hit a lot of terrorists and damage their capabilities and perhaps arrange some kind of international involvement later on, and things would probably improve. But some of these hopeful plans about the future, meaning getting the PA on Israeli bayonets to come back to Gaza, and very hard to do in my view. And I would try not to get carried away with these emotions and hopes for retaliation and so on. I think what I learned, and again, Saturday's attack and events on October 7th taught me how little did I know about everything. But I think if there's something I did learn from 25 years of covering this mess that's called the Middle East is never underestimate both your enemy and the chances of things getting really, really more complicated than you thought. Always think of the worst case scenario. I think right now that this sense of gang-ho among analysts in the media and TV and so on, and among ex-generals, and among soldiers who really, really want to let them pay. All of this is true, and yet we should be cautious about the way we proceed here. But there are no good solutions here. There's nothing. It's a very, very difficult dilemma, because in the end, I have to present the other side as well. Yeah. The line of thinking right now is, look, this is a crazy neighborhood, a villa in the jungle, Bach used to call it. We've seen now that these were not lions and tigers around us. These were the extremely evil men behind this. And if we don't send a very clear message to the region, even in spite of the fact that we have America has our back right now, if there's no clear and significant message, what does Hezbollah learn from this? What do the residents of those burned communities around Gaza? Is anybody, especially kibbutzim, who were left-leaning and liberal and so on, extremely nice people, all of them, would they risk living there again with Hamas's neighbors? I don't think so. What would people do on the northern border in those 28 communities within a 4-kilometer? After what they saw Hamas could do, what do they feel about Hezbollah? Right now, of course, the IDF has evacuated most of those villages, so there's less of a chance of a direct Hezbollah surprise. But we don't, Hezbollah may have other capabilities deeper inside Israel. We don't know. So everybody's quite paranoid about this whole matter right now. I think we should think of the implications. We should be aware that we need to show strength, but not rush into a possible trap. I'm not sure that all of these things could be done at once, but I hope I'm thinking of this.
Adding to this unbelievably complex Rubik's Cube of challenges that Israel is now facing, clearly just how to execute this operation in Gaza and what comes next in terms of governing to provide for security is immense, and certainly one would hope that there's the beginnings of some responsible thinking going on about what possible scenarios there are. We do have a lot of questions about the regional and international implications. I'll pick one in particular from Alex Canner, who says, could you share thoughts on the Israel-America moderate Arab state axis versus the Russia-China-Iran axis, and how we're seeing the playing field change or strengthen in real time, especially given the dual visits, Biden to Israel, Putin in China, and the growing relationships that are beginning to emerge amidst these global powers as it impacts this region.
So this is a big deal as well, and I failed to mention that earlier. But this is about power projection and power competition, even with China and Russia. If we go back to American and Middle East history, there was a growing sense in the last 10 years among moderate Arab leaders that you could not count on the US anymore. going back to Obama not fulfilling his commitment to the red line in 2013. Remember Syria and the use of chemical weapons. His deputy was one Joe Biden at the time, and Biden, if I recall, thought differently about this matter. And then, of course, you've had Trump neglecting to respond to the attack on Saudi Arabia by the Iranians in 2019. And of course, there was all the talk 2 weeks ago, and everything we wrote regarding international affairs had to do with a possible Israeli-Saudi deal. If the US still wants a deal there, then it needs to show how serious it is to the Saudis, help Israel, and convince the Saudis that Israel is still a strong enough partner for the Saudis to invest in this. So this is, again, an alliance. Sometimes a crisis is an opportunity as well. It's a very big crisis. We'll see about the opportunity. And on the other side, of course, what you see quite clear, I'm not surprised about this at all, but what you see is huge anti-Semitism from Russia right now. Russians being actually happy about what happened, Russian trolls and so on, Putin supporters, about what happened to Israel. And it's, for me, it's a good example of good and evil. The fact that the Ukraine is on our side and Russia is on Iran's side. And of course, we know that Iran has helped Russia immensely in its war in Ukraine and just recently. So these are also important developments. I think what the president is trying to do is, first of all, prevent a war and help Israel, but also try to promise some kind of hope for the alliance. But again, it will be hard to do.
Yeah, we have a variety of questions on a range of issues, ranging from the IDF's ability to maintain sort of the international perception of the war. But I want to come back to a question that we actually had from Israel, which was, if you're looking at a crystal ball, and maybe this is a question you can't answer just yet, but what would be the ideal scenario for how this ends after a ground invasion in your own view? Are we facing the prospect of not just a months-long but years-long occupation of Gaza, as was in Lebanon? How do you begin to fashion some form of alternative leadership there?
I hope not. I hope it's a long war. It's going to take a long time. I hope we're not discussing years, at least not years which are going to be as intensive as that. The first period of time would be extremely aggressive. The dangers to Israeli civilians living in the south or in Tel Aviv are hopefully not as bad, because again, in the end, if we look at, of course, it's true that Hamas is keeping a lot of its rockets for the ground invasion. And there will be attempts to kill Israeli citizens in Tel Aviv and shoot at the Ben Gurion airport and so on. But again, Hamas's damage, considering Iron Dome, it's rather limited. But we see we don't have the real numbers. But I'm sure, I'm talking to sources in the IDF, it's quite clear for the time being that Iron Dome was, as usual, extremely successful at intercepting rockets. When they launch a lot more rockets, there will be more casualties. But in the end, compared to the devastation and the loss of lives in the first day, this would not be the big deal. The big deal would be the friction between the soldiers and the Hamas fighters, terrorists on the other side. A positive scenario, as a relatively positive scenario, would be if we somehow magically succeed in killing some of the major leaders of Hamas. If Hamas at one point or another finds it unbearable to stay in the tunnels and people are killed or have to leave, and then hopefully some kind of international involvement. But then again, it's going to be blood, sweat, and tears. So Netanyahu has always thought of himself as Churchill. Unfortunately, he's going to have to prove it soon. It's going to be a very hard challenge, and this is without mentioning Lebanon again. If Lebanon enters the picture, something else. It's the Americans involved. It's a possibility of a regional war. I'm not saying we're there, but my sense, again, speaking to the intelligence people, is that they're hoping that this would be avoided. But even Gaza is going to be quite costly.
We saw just yesterday in the immediate reaction, the immediate assumption that it was Israel that struck the hospital complex. We saw riots all over the Arab world, including
Mhm.
in major Palestinian cities. How concerned are you about the state of the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority and all of this?
Problem is that every time you mention another issue, I'm reminded of how concerned in fact, I am. Look, it has huge effects all over the place, and again, it's a fake story. Something happened there. A, it was not Israel's fault, and B, the numbers are not the real numbers. And then again, a synagogue was burnt in Tunisia. There were attacks on the Israeli embassy in Amman in Jordan. Fortunately, the diplomats are no longer there. People in Egypt are getting angry. There were demonstrations in Turkey, West Bank, East Jerusalem. Yes, there are attempts. Look, it's for the other side, it's a big opportunity they've been dreaming of, and their success was something that surprised them. I may be wrong on this. My sense is that they were too successful, and that Israel woke up, and that the West woke up, and suddenly Israel is fighting a similar branch of ISIS along its border, and it would have to react very, very aggressively, and that the US would be on board as well. So I think in 2 years' time, at least the people in Gaza Strip, the residents, would not think that this was such a good idea. I can't say about the rest. I don't really know where this is heading. But I want to think that this was a wrong gamble for Hamas, that this was not, that it's a huge victory for the time being, but it's in the long run, it's extremely complicated for them. Again, one belief that was shattered Sunday morning was that Hamas really cared about the people of Gaza. They care more about hatred. Look, for a year and a half, 2.5 years by now, or almost 2.5 years, it was the Bennett-Lapid government, and then Netanyahu acting along the same decisions, who allowed workers to enter from Gaza, 17,000 people to enter Israel. And the sense was, okay, this was the good outcome. Considering everything that's happening, Hamas is deterred, or apparently not, and Hamas would like still to maintain control and promise better lives to 2 million people. Well, they haven't really succeeded in that, deciding on the attack on October 7th.
Amos, Shira Efron, our, of course, friend and our Glazer Foundation Senior Director for Research, she texts that Alon Ben David was commenting on Israeli television that there could still be dozens of Hamas terrorists inside Israel proper. Is that your assessment? Do you have any knowledge if that is still a going threat?
It's still a threat. I'm a bit concerned by I like Alon a lot and appreciate him as a professional, but I would try to be cautious about not frightening the public more than needs to be done right now. The assumption is that there are some, it's not exactly sleeper cells, but the fact that there was pure chaos all over the place would mean that there will be attempts of more attacks trying to hit Israeli morale even more. And this could be frightening. On the other hand, I think that the police and the different communities being defended and so on, everybody's woken up by the news, and everybody's more alert than before. And if we go back to all those battles in the kibbutzim, they have, what's the term? Somebody who speaks Hebrew would have to help me with that. Kitot konenut, the actual first responders, armed responders in any kibbutz. Every kibbutz has 10, 12 people who are armed with, sometimes just with handguns and sometimes with rifles. And these guys, in many, many cases, older men, sometimes women as well, sometimes just ordinary policemen, were very, very good at stopping those terrorists in these attacks. So again, I'm not saying that this can happen, but I think everybody's on high alert right now, and people are more willing to look for this. But yeah, they are trying to locate some of these cells, and they're assuming that some of them may be in other places right now.
So Amos, we're really coming up at the top of the hour, the end of our time, but I wonder, just in conclusion, is there anything that we are not paying close enough attention to at this moment or something that you think is particularly notable around the long-term implications of this crisis that we need to pay greater attention to?
Okay, two short or two or three short notes.
Mhm.
One, we haven't mentioned the Israeli extreme right and the settlers. There were a few days of huge incidents, some of them initiated by settlers who intentionally killed Palestinians. We know the youth on the Samaria hilltops and so on. These guys are looking for revenge, and they're not volunteering to enter Gaza. They're looking for a better opportunity of revenge, and this is a danger. And we have Ben Gvir, of course, giving weapons to anybody who wants and so on right now, handguns and so on. And there are, unfortunately, all kinds of Facebook messages with posts with all kinds of terrible scenarios about the Arabs coming to kill us and so on. So there are people playing with fire here, and this could be dangerous as well. I'm assuming that the police and Shin Bet are aware of this. It's a danger you need to take into consideration. Two, I think Israel is about to change. I think in the end, as I said, I think Bibi would not remain in power when the outcome is fully understood by people. But there could be a possibility that people will go even more to the right than before regarding the Arabs. Not so much about the infighting, because for the time being, we seem stronger and more involved and having more love for each other under this terrible shock than hate and animosity as we had before. But Israel is about to change regarding these issues, everything, politics, sense of personal security, something we've forgotten about since the end of the Second Intifada, the way we treat our fighters, what we choose to spend money about, what we do with the ultra-Orthodox and their refusal to take any kind of share in the big issues here, whether it's taxes or military service. So all of these are going to be big issues. And the third and the most crucial is about support for Israel. Look, I've wrote hundreds of critical articles about the occupation, and about the settlements, and about the government, and about extremism, and the current government or current Israel's attitude towards liberals and LGBT and huge issues. All of these issues remain important issues. All of these issues are reasons to criticize Israel. But right now, Israel is suddenly in a Ukrainian situation, and it could be worse, and we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I think you have to remember that. I think, again, I don't want to preach to a Jewish American crowd, but I think that this has to be top priority for a while. First and front and center before, I don't know, before other issues, and again, deep, huge political issues in the United States. But unlike any time in our history, we would probably need your back more than before. And I think that everybody should be sensitive and aware to that. And everybody has their own path and their own decisions to make. But this is the advice, so to speak, that I can give.
Well, I can say that I think the vast majority, overwhelming majority of the American Jewish community has absolutely united and stands with Israel at this moment. And it's a generational moment. As you said, it will impact the next generation of Israelis and how they think about these issues for a generation. I think it also is a generational moment for the U.S.-Israel relationship and how we think about each other and our responsibilities to each other. I want to thank you for taking time amidst all of this to speak with us and to send us those very important, not only the analysis, but the important message that you've just delivered. And just huge thanks to you and to our listeners for joining us. I want to just make a note that Israel Policy Forum will be launching some additional resources in the days to come, educational resources, understanding the history that led up to this moment, as well as the ongoing crises, with additional podcasts. And if there's anything that we can do to provide you or your community with more programmatic resources or educational information in these critical days and weeks to come, please contact us at community@ipforum.org. As always, we thank you for your participation, feedback on all we do, and also your support. And Amos, just huge thanks again. We're sending strength to you And frankly, we're depending on you to help us make sense of all of this and what there is to come. And I know we'll speak again very soon, and I'm always very appreciative of your time, your insights, and frankly, the important message that you've delivered around the necessity of support for Israel at what is the greatest crisis that the country is facing, really since its history. So thank you all, sending you strength, and let's hope to speak again in better days.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.